welcome everybody. Kind of they save the best for last. I hope you'll feel that way, at least in the app. And if you have at the end and you have good comments, you know the room number and the speaker. If not, think of the guy that's next door. If you have any bad comments, use that guy's name. But anyways, so we're going to talk today about using infrared technology for building maintenance. Really, the goal is helping you understand the power of the technology, what it can do for you in the buildings that you're responsible for. And whether you work in multiple buildings or are in charge of facilities, the goal is to understand the power of what this technology can do. For many people, for infrared is something that we can't physically see. And I'm going to go through a little bit of the science of this so that you have a good understanding or a basic understanding of what the technology is actually doing, what it can and cannot do, and the benefits, and some examples of case studies that we've worked with. So a couple of learning objectives to understand what thermal imaging is. Can infrared see through walls? Contrary to what we've learned in many movies, Tom Cruise specifically uses this technology and we come blown away with it, and then we realize, hey man, I couldn't see through that refrigerator like you did in that movie. We're going to talk about our certifications or license required to operate that. Our camera is safe. Can you actually look at the infrared camera when I operate it? And would our maintenance team use this or will it become a brick on the wall? Okay? So as most tools, a lot of people come and we get excited. As men, women who work with tools, we see new tools and we get excited about these and the benefits that they might have. And we might use them a lot in the beginning and then they sit on the shelf. And if you guys knew how many fire departments own thermal imaging, and in fact, I was at a failure of a transformer, a power wire that was going bad, and I'm looking at the guy and I'm like, get your camera out. I was near the property. Oh yeah, so you got to remember that once you truly understand what it can do, you'll see the more benefits that you can use it for. And so we're going to talk about four main sectors, which are the primary. Electrical and roofing. For those that actually visited us in the exhibit hall, you would have understood that that roofing and electrical are still by far the most benefit and use of thermal imaging. But there are so many other things that are used for. So we're going to go through a few of those today. So the schedule, we're going to talk about expanding your vision, which is seen beyond what we physically see. We're going to go through a little bit of an introduction. We're going to talk about energy, HVAC benefits. Also electrical and moisture, and we'll leave a little bit of time for some Q&A, should you have that. Okay? Because you're going to all be experts at the end of this. I don't know how many people really read the bios of everybody that's here, but give you a little background on me. I've been a building inspector for close to 30 years now. I've been using the technology of thermal imaging for over 20 years now, and I saw some missing pieces in this industry. There were manufacturers that sell cameras. There were training organizations that trained people and certified you in the use of the technology. And as I learned when I got into this is that I bought a camera, spent $20,000 in 2005. And just kind of give you the history, when I first wrote a business plan on infrared, it was 1999, when I saw that the camera quotes were in the $75,000 to $100,000 mark. 5 years later, 6 years later, I spent $20,000. So if you're familiar with the economy of scale and you see as more production goes up, the prices come down. See, for many people, it was impractical to spend $100,000 on a tool that was bulky and big. But now these things are pocket size and can be used very effectively. And so I, started performing infrared, but realized there was such a missing piece in the industry because, like I said, the manufacturers make cameras and they would gladly take your money and sell equipment. And then there's certifying bodies that would certify the technology, which is the physics and science of it, but there was nobody teaching you how to properly look at an electrical panel or looking at a roof. So there was many other things that it could be used for, and so that's our goal here today. So this is my only really marketing slide, is that honestly is where I own a large company. We have about 350 boots, 350 sets of boots on the ground, so we're in 44 states. So we service nationwide on switchgear, and that's kind of a map. But other than that, let's talk about infrared and what we can do with it. So again, the goal is to give you a good understanding of what this is. If you use the technology, if you have the technology and it's not getting put to use, my goal is that you're going to get to use this and you're going to be more excited about it after this class. If you don't own one, maybe the incorporation of this tool into your business, you're going to make that decision. I'm not here to sell you anything. If anybody's going to sell you something, it's going to be yourself. And that's, wow, where have you been all my life? So anyway, so For most, this is the movie that most people were first introduced to infrared. And as you see in that clip there, and I'm going to play the part that...
Get the hostages. We move. 5 meter spread. No sound.
It's time for
you guys thinking in your head of these answers right now?
Payback time.
Whoa! How many of you guys said whoa in 1987 when you saw this? So, what's the name of this movie? Why is it that we remember this? We can't remember. Yes, that's a great answer because of all the flicks, movies seem to somewhat have gone downhill, but there's certain movies that stick with us and we can watch over and over. Predator being one of them. And they introduced me to this technology. I was a young adult at the time, and I'm looking going, wow, there was something that can't be seen. And this alien can see people in the night. So today, I use this technology. I have a little bit of a rural town. I'm out of Southern California, but it's very effective on seeing those coyotes that come and hunt the little dog we have at the house. It wants it bad. And they come through the property, and you can't. We're in a dark city, so we have dark skies. So we don't have any street lights where I live. There's a few, but not a lot, and you can't see anything. So very effective at that. Anybody know the two governors? Jesse Ventura. Again, we're proving that we can remember and we have retention value in our minds and brains. And then, of course, one of the vendors that was in the hall was FLIR. They did the infrared in this movie. Actually, the consultant in there was Dr. Bob Matting. And he started doing thermography in 1970. He actually developed one of our training courses as well. So he's a very knowledgeable guy, but he's long retired now and lives in South Carolina. But he's in the credits at the end. So basically a little bit of the history. First of all, we want to get a good understanding of what this technology is. So in the 5th grade, we learned the electromagnetic spectrum. So let me reintroduce you to it. Now, of course, we're all familiar with all the forms of waves of light. We didn't realize they were waves of light, but we know that we couldn't see the microwaves. We can't see the radio waves, infrared waves we can't see, but we can see the visible light. Okay? And then, of course, you've got ultraviolet. So we know all of these things can harm you or allow you to see something. But what our vision is in such a small portion of this band wavelength. And so to understand is basically there was, methodology that people went through to discover this. The ancient ancestors would use mud on their skin and see what would dry first to find out where the infection was. Now we can use an infrared camera. Have you ever heard a veterinarian palpitating? They're feeling for heat on a horse, trying to find where that injured portion of that horse's leg is. Nobody in this room is feeling around the electrical breaker wires going, which one? Yeah, that one. So we're going to show you a little bit about what that is. So each color is a wave of light, and that's what we can see. Now, let me give you an example. I'm looking for somebody with a colorful shirt. What color would you call your shirt? I don't want to offend anybody. What color would you call that? Pink. Anybody, real men wear pink, right? So if you guys were to all look at that, how many would agree that that shirt is pink? Okay? Half. So usually when I ask a question, there might be a trick question. How many of you believe that to be another color? Okay. Now I'd like to know your thinking. What's your thought process? Either you heard this from me or you're a pretty smart guy. Tell me, what color is that shirt, first of all?
It's kind of like a salmon.
Okay. Now we're going down the right path, but we're going to learn something. Hopefully everybody leaves with a nugget today. Anybody would say salmon or pink? Okay, first of all, you're wrong. Anybody else want to offer a color? Nobody's going to. Oh, yes, we have a brave soul. He must be an engineer. No, that's not the answer, but we've got peach, salmon, and pink. Anybody else want to take a crack at it? You, sir? Coral. Okay, so this is why we're here today. Would everybody agree that we wanted to learn? We wanted to wait till the last presentation to say that we had the best learning experience, that it was not coral, peach, pink, or salmon. Okay? That guy is wearing a gray shirt. How many agree with me? You will agree with me at the end, because when we turn off these lights, and absent any light, if we have a little bit of light, what color is his shirt? Do you realize that all colors are a reflection? How many of you guys actually knew that, or had to now go back to 5th grade and say, my gosh, you're right, that tree's not green. That's a reflection. Okay? So absence light, there's shades of gray. So now for anybody colorblind in here? The colorblind guy was supposed to raise his hand and say, sure, it's gray, because you would have been the correct person and maybe won a prize. However, but understanding that each color is a wavelength, and that's a reflection of light. Now we start to understand why the guy who buys the black car versus the guy that buys the white car, and you've always heard, well, the black car is really hot. Do you know why the black car is really hot? It's because black is an absorption of all the energy and all the wavelengths of light, whereas a white light is reflecting the colors. So it's not absorbing all that energy, but reflecting. I'm going to tell you something, that if you're responsible for maintenance and you start to understand the importance of temperature and reflection and all of these things, you will make better decisions for the facilities you manage. For example, many of you would think, how many of you believe that a white roof is the best roof? You guys are all scared to death of me now, right now, because you know this guy's pulling out a bunch of tricks. You know what the problem with a white roof is? It reflects so much energy that it hits a thing that starts with a D and ends with a T. Any science guys want to answer that? Starts with a D and ends with a T. How many of you guys are familiar with the word dew point? Do you know that when you reflect all the energy and you get cold, see, if you go on your iPhone or whatever phone it is and you look at the weather, it'll tell you the temperature and the humidity, and it's a calculation to obtain what dew point is. When you reach dew point and you have materials, you now can cause condensation. Condensation, water, also known as the root of all evils in your buildings, causes more damage. So if we can take a white roof that condenses on the underside and rots out the deck, and you've got a leak and you're going, what the heck happened to my building? Well, guys, you are now all smarter because you just learned something of why color is important and how we don't. That guy's shirt is not salmon. All right, so let's move along. So night vision, some people have believed that night vision is a form of infrared, but it's not. Night vision only works as you need some light for it to work. I need zero light for an infrared camera to do its job, okay? Whereas night vision, if we close this room up and have zero light, you can't see anything. But because all of us have a temperature, and sometimes different than others, I can see every one of you in thermal technology. So there are 3 forms of infrared. There are short, mid, and long wave. For all practical purposes and to make it easy for you, the only thing that you guys are going to ever be looking at, unless you're a science geek, which some of you may be, and that's fair, is that you are going to be working in the long wave. So all the infrared cameras that you can see that might make the budget are long wave. The minute you get to short and mid wave, you're going to be spending more money, but you have a science purpose, or you've become smart enough to know that there are certain roof membranes like TPO that work better with a mid wave. Okay? So the science lesson today is to understand what is infrared and what is heat and how does it get from point A to B. I want everybody to take your hand up and put it on the side of your face without touching it. Okay, tell me what you feel. What do you feel, not touching your face, what has happened? What do you feel? Somebody please give an answer. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. We're all learning, right? Come on, brave soul, answer. Heat. Why do you feel heat? Do you know why?
Radiation.
Radiation, fair, but tell me why. Why is you feeling heat?
Hot surface.
What's a hot surface?
My face.
Could be, especially if you have COVID, right? All right. So I'm going to tell you something, how heat moves. It works through convective, radiation, and conductive. Okay? We're out in the sun, and we feel the heat from the sun. It could be 40 degrees out in Baltimore, which is a little cold today, but you go out in the sun, and you can feel semi-comfortable in a 40, 50-degree day. That's radiant heat. Okay? If you go into a room and we have a convective, most of our HVAC systems in our buildings are convective. They're moving energy, so they have a heat source, and they move that through the building to make it comfortable. That's convective. And then we have conductive. How many of you guys ever been camping with marshmallows? Anybody? And you had a what? What did you use to put that marshmallow on? Stick. What else? Coat hanger, right? How many of you guys use rebar? Y'all know what rebar is. Nobody uses rebar. Can you tell me why you would use a stick and not a piece of rebar? It's the answer is what I just told you. So you imagine holding that marshmallow in with a piece of rebar, and it's a large rebar, you know, number 3, 2, 1, whatever. Well, that conducts energy. It'll take the energy from the fire and burn your hand. But the stick will burn up before your hand will. Okay? So the idea is if you start to understand the science of the color and the temperature, and you understand how heat moves, can we be more effective in the buildings we manage by understanding how energy moves? So if you have a high utility bill, let's figure it out. Do you guys ever heard of the term anybody ever spent the money on a high performance cooler that can hold ice for like 7 to 10 days? It'd be like one of them Yetis. Anybody got a Yeti? Well, somebody's got a Yeti, but that's thank you, finally, man. Some people are starting to, listen, I really like the fact that you just are brave and answer a question, you know? So, you know, I got some kind of driver, because you're a driver. You're driving this bus. He's got a salmon shirt. All right, so if we've got that forms of heat transfer and we understand about the poker and we want to make a good decision, a Yeti is simply using all 3 forms of this heat transfer. You close that with thick insulation with plastic that doesn't allow convective loss, and we prevent that sun heat from getting in because of that insulation that we can hold ice for a long time. So now we start to think about our buildings that we maintain and manage. Is that if we can control the heat loss through controlling the amount of convective, radiant, or conductive loss, we can have a more efficient building, save more money. What happens to the bean counters when you help them save money? They like you. They like you. Yes. Hopefully you got a bonus in there. All right, so let's move right along. So let's talk about a little bit of infrared imagers. So really 1940s, long before anybody knew about it, it was kind of coming about. The military, the government developed this technology for their benefit. And, you know, the equipment has just come a long way. Really, for most people, 1987 was the introduction to what this technology is, and it's out there, and it can see things. And we're seeing more and more movies. I don't think Schwarzenegger's ever had a movie that didn't have infrared in it. But for the most part, by the 80s, 90s, like I said, 1999 was when I first got introduced to it, and now they've got cameras the size of a quarter, you know, that actually fit in a cell phone. So there are opportunities where this equipment has come down, and the economy of scale means these things are starting in the $200-300 range right now. So you can't say I can't afford it, it's not in the budget, because I don't think there's anybody in here with a budget of so small that we can't do anything, we can't operate. Most building managers, owners, guys who set the budgets, they a lot of times will cut maintenance and marketing, the 2 things you need, right? Let's cut the marketing budget, let's cut the maintenance budget, and then they all of a sudden get like, I don't know if Heathrow had a budget cut, but all those familiar with that airport that went down for a day last week, that would have cost in the X times millions for that one day of loss. But we want to prevent things like that. But anyways, today these cameras are in the pocket size. So this is what the equipment looked like. I actually have that camera on the top right. This was a $100,000 unit. You use liquid nitrogen to operate it. I actually do have an operating unit. I bought it for $300. Guy didn't know what he had, but he didn't need it because it was over 100 pounds that you had to lug around. So back in the day, this is what people used to do this. But today it's come down to a handheld or a pocket size or cell phone size that can work it. Typically, switchgear was where all the action was used. So to understand when it comes to infrared detectors, and I'm going to make it easy for you, everybody, the type of camera you'd ever look at is a long wave camera. There are 3 detector specifications that are important to know when it comes to infrared. It's type and wavelength. Is it cooled or uncooled? You are going to be used an uncooled microbolometer long wave. Thermal sensitivity used to be a big factor 10 years ago, but today the thermal sensitivity has gotten good even on the cheap units. So we would have a 200 millikelvin rating on a camera, and the difference between 200 and 100 was another $5,000, $10,000 sometimes, depending on the camera model. Today, the thermal sensitivity has gotten into the 100 millikelvin rating and lower, even on the $1,000, sub-$1,000 cameras. So honestly, it's not a factor anymore. Spatial resolution is the key. That's the one thing you got to know. The more resolution, the more the price. The goal when buying an infrared camera is you want the most resolution for the best price. Can everybody remember that? Most resolution, best price. All right, so this is the difference between sensitivity. So this is looking at a CMU wall, the grout fill. The difference between sensitivity, which was previously a problem, is your ability to see the difference between grouted cells and non-grouted cells, or insulated or non-insulated cells. This is just an example of, is that sensitivity sensitive enough? Now, there's another reason that you're going to be looking at a block wall. You're going to want a higher resolution camera because your picture will never look good with a low resolution looking at something so massive. When you're looking at something that's 5 feet away, it might be reasonable. So now this is where resolution has everything. So the basic cameras, in fact, there's cameras in the $200–300 range that fit in this. But would I be successful if I came to my client and provided that picture alone? No, I probably need to have a picture of this whole wall, and to get there, you actually can take 4 pictures, combine them together to get this one. And then you can take 4 of this picture. Time equals, oh my God, so many people knew the answer. Now that I saw a prize came, everybody's answering. I just don't have enough for all the people that answer like you. But time equals money, and so, reasonably you have to make a decision when purchasing equipment, what is going to be the most effective way to accomplish that, and do we spend $300 when we really needed to spend $5,000? So qualifications, what qualifies people to do this type of survey? There is no license, okay? What you first need is a passion and an understanding of what the technology does and can do for your facility, all right? There are situations, and I'll tell you that I would say that probably 30% of all my government contracts and high-end contracts that we do, they'll usually stipulate that you have a level 2 certification, okay? So I'm a level 3 thermographer. There are level 1, level 2, level 3. I will explain what that means. So level 1 is very common for somebody who is basically working with the technology probably once at least a week. It's for maintenance considerations that you have a firm understanding of. Believe it or not, that's a 32-hour course, and I have already given you 50% of that course already right now. Now that you guys have that good understanding of what I've taught you so far and the wavelengths and all that stuff, that's what a level 1 is. A level 2 is regular use. Somebody who is basically doing this on an ongoing basis. You have a large facility. We're looking at the panels, the equipment, the roofing. We're tracing leaks. We're taking all the service calls for the company when they have these problems. And there's usually, you're in excess of 100,000 square feet that you're responsible for. And a level 3 is a large company that has multiple facilities that establishes protocol and procedure, okay? Or an instructor, okay? So because I teach this, I figure I better go all the way. So just to give you an idea, on level 3, less than 5% of the thermographers in the world are level 3, okay? There is one more beyond that. It's called an ASNT. That's for the nerd, the guy that just likes to take tests, and he wants to be the best, okay? There's some of those in here, I know it. All right, so how to hire a thermographer. This is really important. So whether you decide to hold this in-house for your services or you're going to need to hire somebody for your services, I wanted to boil this down to a simple procedure. How many like simple? They like the KISS method. Let's stick with it. All right, so I'm trying to think of how do you figure out the right guy for the job, because there's a lot of guys that might buy a drone that happen to buy an infrared camera. Remember, there's no license. Anybody can, license to fly the drone, but anybody can buy an infrared camera. Anybody can buy a drone. But do you even know the science behind the roofing system to determine, is it going to do its job? That's what we truly want to understand. To me, it's not just owning an infrared camera, but it's owning the science in your head. Number 1 tool that you guys can ever own is what? It's your brain. Like I said, if I had a goal, it was you leaving with some nugget of education here on what this technology can do. So here's the questions that you want to ask when it comes down to hiring somebody. First of all, any professional thermographer will have a 320 by 240 minimum resolution camera. But you don't need to ask them that question. Anybody working on electrical in your buildings will have a minimum level 2 certification, okay? That's a minimum. That means that they're dedicated and committed. So the committed and dedicated thermographer will meet these, no problem. What you're gonna ask is, do you have experience in it? But then also asking another question. Can you tell me the credentials of that person so that you can verify that? And also, can you tell me the make and model of the camera they plan on using in my facility? Now, Google is our friend. And if you guys were to take that make and model of that infrared camera to the internet, you will probably get a good idea of what the cost of that camera is. How many of you guys would feel qualified that the guy shows up with a $1,500 or $2,000 daily rate for services? Just so you know, that's about what the guys are charging. He's charging you this, but he shows up with a $300 infrared camera. How many of you guys would feel confident in this guy? No. The confidence is finding that this guy has invested in this business and he has the right equipment. So Google being your friend, you're going to be able to search, do they have the right equipment? All right, so we've talked about all to multiple difference. By the way, this is the one that I use right here. This is the camera that I currently use. That's about $17,000. Okay? So let's talk about a few of the things that you can use with an infrared camera. Energy. Okay? I've had clients that have called me specifically. I have two particular clients that I have worked with over the years specifically that called me with an energy problem. Their bill's too damn expensive, and they want to know what they need to do to fix it. Okay? A lot of people will have ideas on fixing things, but if I take a scientific approach of the Yeti, it's really complicated, conductive, convective, and radiant, and I look at that and think about that and take some pictures of the building, I could probably make a good decision. So with that being said, I want you to understand the simple principle. Hot goes to cold. Okay? So remember when we put our hands up? I'm going to now give you the answer of what the hand next to your face was. Hot goes to cold. So the minute you put your hand up there, do you realize that heat is going to this? So if you have a, let's use a number, 95 degrees surface temperature of heat, what is the temperature of that wall? Now, none of you are experts on thermographers till the end of this course. I'll certify all of you. But what do you think the temperature of that wall is? The science guys are they're like, yeah, I know what that is. It's cold in here or whatever. Perfect, that's what I call it. It feels good in here, honestly. But 95 degrees going to 68 degrees. Hot goes to cold. The minute you put your hand up, what you did was stopped the flow of energy. That is called what? It's in our buildings. Insulation. Insulation, that R value will slow down the transfer of that energy. Remember the Yeti, we're slowing down the convective, radiant, conductive loss of energy that occurs with insulation. So this is the easiest way to explain to bean counters who have to make the decision of whether or not we insulate or not, or how much insulation, is that if we can just put the hand on the side of your face. Imagine sitting in the board meeting and having that little education session. So hot goes to cold, and keep in mind in the winter, it's always trying to get out. In the summer, it's always trying to get in. So these are just simple principles that everybody has a house, hopefully, or you live somewhere. But that energy is always trying to move, and we're trying to slow it down so we can have comfort, and that exists in our building. So I'm going to give you a case of a relatively new build. This is a casino in Southern California. In the desert, it's about 115 degrees on this day, and they have a $300,000 monthly utility bill. Okay? They hired a bunch of experts. Energy auditors came in and had all kinds of great ideas on what they could do. We're going to lock down the thermostat so that it senses when they come in the room, it'll turn on, and then when they leave the room, it'll turn off. So when you go to sleep at night, you're going to sweat you're going to get hot because the AC's turned off. So anyways, this was their idea. Well, I'm going to take a scientific approach. So they retained me to come in and evaluate their building over 2 days. I told them what I need. I established protocol and procedure for doing this survey. So when I get to this building, I take a thermal signature of this building, first of all. Now, of course, you're never going to get this picture with a $300 infrared camera. But when we look at this picture, and if we were to say the darkest is the coldest and the hottest is the whitest, what are we seeing going on? Does everybody see a thermal pattern in this picture? You can get an idea that there is a thermal pattern occurring, which to me, when I see that, I say, we're getting heat loss. Now, even though we're understanding it's 115 degrees outside and they're cold, cold is still heat loss. In fact, infrared energy radiates energy down to minus 432 degrees, so just so you know. When I went in this building, I realized that there was pop-outs and extensions in the rooms in this hotel. And I was realizing that all these cold spots above the windows was this spot that inset came in. Now, for those who don't understand energy, insulation must be placed on all 6 sides, top, bottom, front, back, left, right, or it's ineffective. In fact, if you think about the principles of energy, that if we have a piece of drywall without insulation in contact with it, the heat hits that wall and then conducts, and it has nothing slowing it down after that. So that's why insulation must be continuous. It cannot have a gap. Otherwise, it transfers in the way energy moves. That is called thermal bridging. How many of you ever heard the term thermal bridging? Good, we got some science geeks in here. All right, so thermal bridging is what's occurring here and that heat loss. So imagine me coming into this, and I'm sitting with the chief who was about 30 years ago. It's an Indian casino. He's about 30 years old, and his mother behind him with her hand on his shoulder. And I had to explain this to all these engineers who never were taught thermal bridging. In fact, what they hired me for is to determine if window tint would be the solution in their building to saving energy. And I reserved 4 rooms at this hotel at that night. They window tinted 2 of the rooms, and only to find out that, I'm going to break it to you guys, window tint is one of the biggest problems that you can ever do. It goes on the inside of the glass, inside of the window, not the inside of the glass, but the inside of the room. And what happens if we're slowing down heat transfer? It's hitting one pane of glass, then hits an interstitial sealed space with argon or krypton, and then hits another glazing unit, but then it has tint. What does tint do? It reflects. So guess what? The glass sections, the glazing sections, were between 20 and 30 degrees hotter than the non-tinted windows. And I did all the thermal investigation with a camera and, basically thermocouples, and I was able to come back and says, not only, guys, is tint the worst thing you can ever do, every single one of your windows in the hotel has already failed. The architect was from the East Coast and had no idea what 115 degrees was. And so the windows that got slated in this building were completely wrong. They had to replace every single window in this 5-year-old hotel. So this is a courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. Not a $300,000 bill, but a $60,000 bill. And they were convinced by a HVAC control large company, very large, to come in and put individualized zoned thermostats, and that will drop their bill. Their bill didn't even change a lick. And so the people who own this particular building were out of Europe, and they are very experienced and know this temperature benefit. They hired me and paid me a good amount of money to come evaluate. The hardest part about this job is I'm in the ghetto. And I'm doing this survey at nighttime. And I've got a $30,000 camera with me at the time, and even the police came by and said, "Son, what are you doing here? This is not the place to be." And I said, "Can you just watch me? I got to be here till like midnight." So he took a good light on me. In fact, I don't know if that's he's somewhere in here, but I had to go to all angles of this building, and same thing. Thermal bridging was what was the heat loss in addition to all the windows. But when you look at this pattern, you start to understand that I start to investigate all these things, and I realize these areas, these interstitial spaces above the ceiling, where it went straight to the outside, caused thermal bridging, and that heat loss is one of the things that was affecting their utility bill. So we draw up a little, diagram and explain it, and then I give them the picture, and they're like, "Oh my gosh!" And then they realize they have to spend more money. All right, so let's do a commercial freezer. How many of you guys have ever had an energy drink? Okay, my wife doesn't like me to have energy drinks. She's over there. But the best job in the world, okay? I get a call from Little Caesars Pizza that we want you to inspect this 20,000 square foot commercial freezer. It's a -5 and a -20 freezer. And I said, okay. And they said, but it's full right now. And I said, what is it full of? And they said, it's full of frozen apples. And I said, frozen apples, okay. So I get there, and this is what I see. Now, keep in mind, guys, these are 50-gallon steel drums stacked all the way up to the ceiling. Monster Energy frozen apple concentrate. It says it on not one can for Monster Energy what that secret ingredient of apple juice is, but I have figured it out, and my wife's still not convinced because she says it's the other garbage that they put in there that's going to kill me. I said, you'll be rich. I have to carry one of those policies. But this is their building, and showing you with freezers what thermal imaging can do and how the doors and how the heat loss that occurs, the forklift hitting the wall, puncturing, all of these areas are in effect making this a weakness in that Yeti cooler. So anyway, some examples there. Just large building convention centers. It's very simple. I point the camera. I look like a genius. How many of you guys like to look like a genius? What you do? Everybody feels good about that? It's not bad to feel good about what you do for a living and then all of a sudden, yep, I do this. I'm pretty good. And all you did is turn on that camera and take a picture because you had a little bit of knowledge and understanding of how heat moves. All right, so HVAC system, sometimes 30 to 50% of the bill. So if we have a high utility bill and the owner is wondering why it's so high, and you can start with that first section, and then you can start focusing on the HVAC. You realize that every hole in the building, shut the refrigerator door, close the front door. Why did we grow up with these things? Can you just close the door behind you? Because that Yeti, our house, is trying to control that energy. And every time you leave the door open, what is the HVAC doing? It's making up. So you open up the refrigerator door, the compressor will come on. As long as the door is closed, the refrigerator is very efficient. But when you open the door, it has to make up for this loss. And that's the key behind what can a thermal camera do? It can see where this heat loss is occurring. So if you can save those things, you'll understand that. Let's start with the highest. Lighting is about 17% of the load. And most every building is focusing on going to LED. How many of you guys have gone through this now? Okay, it's pretty standard that we are changing out all the incandescents, which are being outlawed, and the fluorescents. They're great lightsabers until you understand the chemicals. And then you go to these LED lights that should last forever, and the LED lights save the energy. Okay. But if we can focus on the hog of it, it's the HVAC. So saving some energy, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? First of all, how many of you ever use the term air balancing? It's an effective tool. You ever get one office that says it's hot and one office that says it's cold? Well, sometimes taking a thermal camera and going around that building and determining that will be very beneficial. Whether you have small 5-ton or 15 or 50-ton units on your roof, or you have a central plant, the thermography camera is that tool that can help you see, is that equipment working as it should? And so that's why going around liquid and gas lines, they tell you, we want to see a 20-degree delta between the liquid and gas. We want to see a 20-degree delta between the inside and outside. And many times we can have failures because of loss, convective loss, okay? Or a system that's not charged properly. So there might be other tools that are needed to identify that. So going through those buildings, going through each office, taking a sampling, drawing a map and saying, hey, and you look at the map and you go, geez, all the rooms are pretty close, but over here is a totally different temperature. So let's go look at that unit and determine what's going on and why it's not producing the cooling that we need. So, cha-ching, another thing for infrared that can be used. All right. You go down to hotels that you're staying in right now, and you know, because once you get an infrared camera, you're starting to use it on all kinds of things, man. All kinds of things. And then you're looking in the room, you're looking for coyotes, you're finding the animals at night, taking it camping with you. But you can see all the heat loss that occurs, the convective losses in rooms. This brings convective losses to a visual aspect for you. All right, so let's go into the nuts and bolts and the meat and potato. This is where the money's at. Okay? This is where the biggest savings is going to be for buildings, because you realize that every time you have a bad connection on a circuit, that is energy loss. That is costing money. Okay? So switchgear, of course, you know, back in the day, this is what started it. It still is the highest use of thermal imaging, you know, from power lines, distribution systems, substations, you know, all the way to our electrical system. So what's the difference between what we feel and what we can see? Well, when we can feel it, we know how to respond. Mommy, my hand hurts, can you fix it? But who can see the problem outside of the label that I put on that? Can anybody see the problem there? I'm going to tell you, you'll get up there and you'll say, well, I think one of the strands on the stranded line is cut. Well, thinking and knowing are two different things, and when we put our camera on, it's very clear where the problem is. Now, 80-90% of all faults in thermography are a loose connection. So with that said, we can keep moving. But here's the biggest change that occurred in the industry, is that NFPA 70B for the last 50 years has been a recommendation. It now became a mandate, which means that every facility, every 12 months, has to have an infrared survey. They don't say who does it. You can do it in-house, but these are those books. 1977 talked about thermal imaging, okay? 2019, it was using the term recommended practice. 2023, by the time adoption would be last year, is now the standard. Why is it important to know that? Because the difference between recommendation and standard is that when you have a problem on your facility, what do? Think about Heathrow. They are going to be going back and doing research. Did they do their service? That transformer that blew up didn't just blow up. It was probably showing signs of it for a long time. Okay? So insurance carriers are going to be the driving force. And I'm going to tell you that's one thing that standard did not specify is who's the police. They don't say that. So there's organizations that are self-insured and there's organizations that are insured. I can tell you that carriers like CNA are huge advocates. They're a big carrier. It's very important to them that you follow this. And so much that this client that I did this job for got this notice last March, and in January they gave him a notification of a cancellation. The owner of the building called me and he said, I need to get this done quick. Why is that? Because the carrier just canceled me over not performing thermography. This is the survey I did. Can anybody read that temperature on the bottom there? This is his main panels outside of he has 11 panels coming in, meters. This is a meter section that's 306 degrees, okay? Now, when I opened up the circuit, the electrician opened it up, there was no wires there. What was happening was the feeders were causing, there was probably a nick in the feeder insulation and it was electrifying the box, and then because the boxes are grounded, it was carrying and completing a circuit, creating a 306 degree fault. I told him to get on the phone with the utility for an emergency repair. The next day, they came out that day, did a repair, did not do it sufficiently. They replaced all the feeders coming into that building. This is from a guy that said, why do I need to do this? And the insurance carrier saying you're canceled, and he got a firm understanding of the benefit. It was the first imaging survey he had ever done on his building. And now we understand why the carriers are going to be demanding it. So why do we have problems? Because people do stupid things. Okay? You know, first of all, buildings should be loaded. There are some references. There's a lot of guidelines. Usually when you use any thermographer, they'll have a specific guideline. If your company has standard of practice where you have established guidelines, whether you follow it or you want them to follow it, you can. I have organizations that I work for that tell me the standard they would like to go to. There's NETA, EPRI. I typically use the EPRI guideline. Most standards are written in Celsius, so just be aware there's a conversion. Typical connections, loose connections are faults. Overload. Anybody know the electrical rule? What's the maximum load on a circuit? 80. Oh my God. Again, I just don't have 30 prizes. But a 20 amp circuit with a 19 amp is an overloaded circuit. And that's the things that we'll see with thermography. All right? And so splicing, you can tell this is the difference between a higher resolution camera and a lower resolution. See how it has a blur, but then it's a lot more clear? That's the difference in resolution, but they both can see the fault. So from maintenance perspective, many times even the lower cost cameras can do the job. But for your annual surveys and for specific needs, you might want to be looking for that. All right, so this is a splice on a knife switch. This is just a single phase. But the point of this is showing that here we have a 230 degree knife switch that has a problem, and this exists. I've had a very large hotel chain in Palm Springs, California, that I did this on their main chiller, and I had a 300+ degree fault on their system, and keep in mind this is in the heat of summer, okay? So when you got two plants that are running this whole facility and one goes down in the heat, okay, something hits the fan. So knowing the problem before it happens is the key and goal. Okay, so those AC disconnects, This is a control panel on an RTU, rooftop unit. If you guys can see these photos, you guys will see where the conductor going in was not trimmed back. This is 3 weeks ago, guys, that I had this picture. See the wire? Can you see the crimp? I didn't know insulation was a conductor. Let's talk about moisture. My goal is to make it easy and also finish this class semi on time. What do I got, 5 minutes? 10 minutes? All right, so I'm going to try and steam through this. Water goes as far away. Electrical, path of least resistance is always coming back. It comes home. But water is always trying to get away. So when we look at water in a building, we can see that although what we saw as the water thermally is not where it started, water travels, and that's the mystery of it. So understanding how to work that and how you can turn on hot water, see a leak, or see a difference of temperature, we can sometimes track that down to the source. Okay? So keep in mind, knowledge is the number one tool in your bag. Being able to understand what it can do and how it can do it is key. But the most beneficial aspect of thermal imaging in buildings, I told you, are electrical and roofing. There is not one roofing manufacturer that endorses or authorizes the use of a coating or a membrane installation over a wet substrate, period. I talked with all of them in this room and they all agree. Okay? Water getting into buildings. This is a brand new college that was built. They had water. It was an arts building. You can see now why the buildings are the way it is. But when I showed up, this is what I saw. They had 50 holes cut in the walls trying to figure out. It's called frustration. Why did water happen? Put on the thermal camera and I start to see a pattern. I saw cracking. Can you see that hairline crack there? I do a moisture meter test above and below the crack, and I can see that the moisture level was highest below the crack. I know the source. It was an acrylic stucco that was allowing water in, and they didn't put an egress path, so there was no lintel above the windows for water to get out. They spent a lot of money, went to court. It was a 7-figure settlement, and they had 6 months of investigators until this guy came and showed up and told them what the problem was. All right, so there's the water coming through over the windows. You can tell by the tools there, they had a lot of money in this project. So gave me the clues to answer. They didn't put a egress path. So, water is very easily seen because the temperature of water is different. But roofing is really where the understanding of where the money is, because at $15 a square foot, by the time you start getting roofing in, you take a $1.3 million building, square foot building, and you can do the math and see how much a roof would cost. So if I can track, one thing to understand is it's estimated that 70 to 80% all roofing material in the landfill is still good. The fact is that the reason why it's there is because the salesman on roofing was really good. Frustration will lead to spending unnecessarily, but if we can track that water down and know exactly where it is, then we can make better decisions going forward. So, as I said, there's a lot of uses. This is a senior living home. They got water pouring through. Frustration leads to the fact that this is the Baltimore Convention Center, guys. So we did this building as well. And I can tell you it's probably only got about 3%, but you can see this is all the water in this roof. All of these locations are all the water. This is heat loss right here. So once you understand the science and the technology of it, I can know that, hey, it's probably only 3% of the roof, but are you due for replacement? Solar panels, anybody ever done that? This is 500,000 solar panels. We were able to find a 70% efficiency factor because 30% of it was down. So buildings, heat loss, a lot of different cases, stucco delamination, grout fill, cell fill, termites. Look at that! I'm somehow getting down there, but I want to know if there's any questions. I want you to know that I have business cards up front. You're welcome to them. I have some fancy pictures that you can grab, a little postcard that has some pictures. You can send it home to mom and say, look what I learned. And then if there's any other questions I can have for you, I thank you guys for being here today, and I encourage any questions. I'm here as long as you have them. But thank you guys.